Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the show. It's Step In. My name is Perre. I'll be your host for today as we discuss the relationship between gender-based violence and mental health. In the studio here, I have Tafadzwa Mike, and on the line, I have Dr. Sebanda. Tafadzwa, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. My name is Stefan Zameki, and I am a mental health activist. I am with SALT Africa. SALT is an abbreviation for someone always listens to you. And we are focused on mental health issues, and mainly adopting and adapting to mental health awareness by cascading Afrocentric solutions to Afrocentric mental health related issues, focusing mainly on primary mental health care.
All right. Thank you, Tafadzwa. On the line, we have Dr. Sebanda. Doc, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Dr. Samgeli Sosfanda. I am an international legal research consultant, and I consider myself a rape and sexual violence expert because this is an area that I'm very passionate about. I'm also passionate about the rights of women and children. I like writing a lot, and I'm into feminist approaches, African feminism, cultural feminism, radical feminism, you name it.
All right. This is going to be a very interesting discussion, okay? So, as you all know, we are part of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This is day 12. You should be aware of this one. So, as we jump into our discussion today, maybe you might start by having a brief discussion and a brief definition of what gender-based violence is, as well as what mental health really means. Tafadzwa, you can go ahead and take that one.
Okay. Well, my understanding of what gender-based violence is any form of violation of any human right, be it male or female, man or woman. And this is emotional, psychological, physical, economical, the list goes on. That's my understanding of gender-based violence. And then we also have mental health. Mental health, for me, what I believe is the state of complete well-being. And by well-being, not just mental well-being, but a holistic approach looking at your physical, your emotional, and environmental well-being, because the environment also plays a huge part with regards to your mental wellness.
All right. Thank you for that one. I love that you mentioned and you defined mental gender-based violence as an issue that goes beyond gender.
Yeah.
It's not only a women or a female problem. Doc, on the line, you can just comment on this one, your understanding of gender-based violence and mental health.
All right. I like to take the definition by Pumla Dineo-Gola, who is a South African writer. In her book, Rape, a South African Nightmare, she defines gender-based violence as a form of brutality. It is a form of gender war against survivors' bodies and psyches, meaning that it does not only affect a person's body physically, but gender-based violence also affects a person's mind. In the Beijing Declaration and Program of Action, in to be specific, paragraph 113, it says that any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical or psychological harm, which also amplifies the issue of both the physical aspect and the mental aspect. So it may consist of threats or threats of such acts, or it can consist of coercion or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, whether it's in the public or in private life. It can occur in the family, including battering, which is beating, sexual abuse of female children in the household, marital rape, female female genital mutilation. So there is a very wide spectrum when it comes to what gender-based violence is. And I would like to agree with Tafazo that sometimes gender-based violence also affects men, and men usually who are not looking as masculine, who are not looking as feminine, I mean, as men enough. It could be men who are poor. It could be men who are looking slightly shorter than the rest, or men who are basically different. So sometimes those men actually face gender-based violence as well. And yes, indeed, it does affect mental health, because once a person's state of mind is not proper, or it's not in the right place, then they cannot achieve their God-given potential. They become less than what they would ordinarily be had it not been for the emotional, psychological, or traumatic experiences, whatever they may be going through.
Okay. Thank you, Doc, for that insightful definition. Perhaps we'll also, you highlighted a lot on the different forms and types of gender-based violence. Maybe coming back to the studio for you, Tafadzwa, can you please just highlight how various types and forms, as highlighted by Doc, affect mental health? Perhaps would like to delve into the relationship between the two concepts.
Absolutely. I'm going to start off with a very unpopular one. I say unpopular because 80% of perpetrators are said to be men. So I would like to start with the men as the victim, because looking at mental health issues, you find men are not as outspoken and as forthcoming as we women are. Notwithstanding the issue that with issues of violence, interpersonal or partner violence, you'll find that most women are Stockholmed. And Stockholm, again, is a term we use in psychology, where your perpetrator or your captor keeps you. There's stages to it, where in the first stage they woo you, and the second stage they start isolating you from those that you may use as your support systems. So I would like to start with looking at men, where you say men are affected. The smaller percentage of men that go through forms of abuse and violence will be affected, because men naturally do not speak out. If we're talking about mental health issues, you rarely, looking at our African man, will find a man who's sitting down and crying and saying, I can't make it through the day, or I'm worrying about something. So to then push into the aspect of GBV, it then becomes so complicated, because men will obviously not speak out. In very rare cases do we find men who would want to say, yes, I'm a victim of GBV. Considering all the other societal and cultural issues that we can look at, and the labeling that comes with it. And then looking at the women, I've spoken of being Stockholmed, where you are in a position where your oppressor or the perpetrator has put you in a spot, because by the time you're isolated, by the time they start giving you the signals that I'm not endangering you, but if anything, if you were to go against my will, you are in danger. Like, say someone then just starts having guns or knives, or those tools that can harm you near you. It's a sign of showing you that I'm not going to harm you yet, but if you intend to speak out about anything that you may dislike, I will harm you. So that fear that is cast and thrust onto a woman is then what you see as going on after someone has come out of it, as the post-traumatic stress and the trauma that you have continues to linger on, because you start going backwards through those steps. And in most cases, if people do not seek help, you may find that those people go into serious depression because of the inability to speak out. So there is absolutely no way you can differentiate GBV and mental health, because one of the main strands of GBV are psychological issues.
Okay. Thank you for that contribution. Maybe just a follow-up Could you please just highlight a bit more before I go to Doc's opinion on that one, on the issue on gender-based violence and stereotypes? You mentioned a lot on men just being afraid maybe to come out and to say what they feel or what they're going through. Just maybe highlight how it goes both ways, how female are affected by these stereotypes.
Well, the stereotypes are, in most cases, you'll find people will expect that abuse is in women in vulnerable communities. Yes, it's high there because of lack of education and lack of awareness. But you'll find that even in what we call the well to do women, those stereotypes come to play because it's not just a certain class. It's not classist. Gender-based violence is not classist. And again, bringing into the gender issue, it's not sexist because it happens to both men and women. And then we also want to look at the stereotype where we think that violence or abuse only happens to women. It also happens to men, though they are a smaller population, largely women, because of not just our biological makeup, because sometimes you find some women are weightier than men, but still they're being abused. It's also because of the cultural stereotypes. If you look at how we've been brought up in our African context, what a woman is supposed to do. And I would also like to bring in the religious stereotypes where in the churches, the woman is supposed to be submissive. But to what extent is this woman supposed to be submissive? When do we differentiate between the biblical submissiveness and being abused? So those are some of the stereotypes that you find. And then you also think there's the money issue where you think, again, it's in the financially lacking communities. But you also find that even in the well-to-do communities, the upper class, there's a lot of abuse. But again, it brings us back to the labeling. It comes back to us as the community. What do we have to say? What do we say to someone when she's in an abusive relationship or he's in an abusive relationship and when they're out of it? And also, it's not just interpersonal relationships where we see issues of abuse. It's even in interpersonal relationships where though on a 70% scale, you find that it is mostly within family and relationships of people that you know and people that you are faces that you are familiar with. It's quite rare, but not uncommon that it happens with strangers where you have issues of bush rape and stuff like that. So the stereotypes are numerous, to be honest. They're numerous.
We could go on.
Yeah.
Okay. Doc, can you just comment on the stereotypes and maybe just zoom in a bit on what we can do as a society in terms of dealing with such stereotypes? What action can we take in terms of addressing the stereotypes, and how best can we try to propose or to work for a gender-based violence-free society?
I would say that, like she mentioned, culture, let me not even say culture, our social upbringing, it produces some kind of stigmas around mental health and psychological issues to an extent that, it's not easy for a person, whether male or female, to say that I've got a problem. My mind is not okay. It's because it's like it's an African to actually feel that way or think that way. We're supposed to be strong, we're supposed to be imbogoto, those kinds of things. And then once there's evidence that a person is not doing well mentally, then obviously there's a lot of judgment and stigma that goes around that. And maybe let me try and go back a little bit and address something. What is the root of GBV? In our society, we've got a very patriarchal society. And by patriarchy, I mean the system of domination of women by men. And sometimes we experience this GBV because they are unequal power relations between men and women that come from history, that date back as far back as the colonial era and even beyond. I always like to quote Tsitsi Angaremha in her book Nervous Conditions, where she talks about the relationship between male and female, girls and boys. Allow me to quote. She's talking about this girl called Tambu. Tambu is a girl who has to stay home while her brother is going to school. She says investing time and money in women is the same as putting one's money in the neighbor's house, because women leave home and serve their husbands' families. Men should have a career because they are the family's providers, while women get prepared to take care of their husband and children. That is Jeremiah speaking to his daughter Tambu when he found her reading a piece of a newspaper. So I just wanted to basically sort of like go back a little bit. Why do we have that? She even says the needs and sensibilities of women in my family were not considered a priority or even legitimate. In those days, I felt the injustice of my situation, and every time I thought about it. So I just wanted to basically let us go back a little bit. Patriarchy, how we raise our male children, how we raise our female children in the home. It has a bearing on gender-based violence and how these men and women, of course, then relate to other people in the society.
All right. Thank you, Doc. Thank you on that. Maybe just you can highlight a bit on how best can we try and attend to issues to do with this society that's tainted in patriarchy and all the support systems that don't really address the issue of gender-based violence. What can we do as the youth? What can we do as intellectuals? What can we do? I mean, on various societies, what can they do in terms of trying to paint a gender-based violence-free society?
All right, let's start from here. When you want to do medicine, you go to medical school. When you want to study law, you go to law school or you go to a law faculty. If you want to study architecture, you have to go to the right place. If you want to go into the arts, you want to do drama, you have to go to the relevant institution and join the relevant department. But when it comes to our intimate partner relationships, where we experience most gender-based violence, whether it's murder, femicide, rape, sexual violence, nobody teaches people how to love each other. We don't have that kind of situation whereby before you can get into a relationship or get into a marriage, we don't have structures in place to teach people this is how you're supposed to relate with children. The day when you have a child, this is how you should treat a child. This is how you're supposed to mold the child and build them into the person that you want. And you find that even with the men in our societies, nobody tells them how to love us as women. So I think I would like to propose a university or a college of life where marriage and intimate partner relationships are dealt with. My brother, it scares me, to think that when I wanted to get married, all I needed was a birth certificate and an ID, right? Yes, to enter into a long life relationship where I'm going to bring other human beings into this earth and teach them things. And all I needed was a birth certificate. And so did my partner. All he needed was his birth certificate and his ID. No teaching whatsoever. Of course, we have churches, but it's not everyone who is affiliated to a church. And it's not every church that teaches you what is courtship. So if we can have like those kinds of structures, I call it maybe the University of Life, where we have traditional leaders, where we have members of society, where we have even medical practitioners teaching what is sex, what's supposed to happen. Because some people, they think that when they're in an intimate partner relationship and they're engaging in sexual intercourse, it's just a matter of two physical bodies. And yet there has to be an understanding. That's why we have marital rape. Sometimes people don't understand that it's not just an act. The other person has to be willing as well, so that this act can be harmonious and actually okay for both parties. So
All right.
that's my proposition.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that amazing contribution. Tafadzwa, what are your thoughts on this one? How best can we try and deal with these stereotypes?
Before I respond, I would actually just want to say it's amazing how Doc was like in my thoughts. It's something I have constantly and avidly been saying that, I'm married, but nobody taught me what it's like to be married. My experience is different from what is on social media. My experience is different from what my parents said it would be, even if we had that conversation. So I strongly agree that there are a lot of things in our society, in our community, in our culture. I like to use the word culture, but I use it in quotes and hesitantly because it'll go down to a whole different
Yes,
conversation,
yes,
like what culture, which culture. But in our community, in our society, there are things that we want to pretend as if they shouldn't be spoken about. But everyone is doing their bit to contribute to that subject, which should not be had behind closed doors. If we are ready to live and coexist in a peaceful manner, in a way that there is no violence, there is no abuse, that we understand and respect each other. I strongly concur with Doc that we need, fine, if we can't get a university of life, again, the religious element, I have nothing against it, but they also have barriers to it. If you bring in someone who went to school for it, or someone who will call a spade, I remember my first year at a certain university in the country where we had career guidance during orientation, and they called human body parts by their names in Shona. And I think you can understand how heavy that was. And this is in public. And you're like, oh my God, we don't say things like that. But we're in university and we're going to engage in so many different activities as young adults. We need to get to a point where we're honest with each other in our leadership, in our different spectrums, in our different spheres. Honesty is where we need that's the starting point. And we discuss all of these topics because they're interlinked. We're talking of 16 days of activism against GBV, but it doesn't mean that it only begins and ends from the 25th to the 10th. This is happening each and every day. We're celebrating the festive season, but there are people who have anxiety because of holidays, because of gatherings, because of family. There are issues within families that have not been dealt with. So I think the takeoff point is honesty. What do we want to achieve? Where do we want to go? Are we ready for it? Because it comes with a whole lot of uncomfortable aspects to it that we need to be ready to approach.
Okay.
We need to be ready to accept that certain norms are going to change. Certain topics are going to be really pricky and thorny. So yeah, let's start from what exactly do we want to talk about? Like, what is 16 days? What is GBV? What is mental health? Because there's no way you can leave out mental health when you're talking about a human being, because it all starts in a mind, perpetrator's mind. When he plots, when he goes through what he experienced or what she experienced as a child, because some of us are battling childhood traumas that we're only acting out today. What processes when he or she lifts up something to beat somebody else, and probably during that time you're not even yourself, you're controlled by the anger that is within you, and you need anger management, but we think it's for them and not for us. So yeah, it may sound cliche, but there is no health or no human element that we can talk about without beginning the conversation, the candid conversation around mental health.
All right. All right. Well, it is an interesting discussion indeed. I like that you mentioned, you highlighted on the youth and their relationships, as well as their understanding on gender-based violence. There's the general misconception and the treatment of gender-based violence is a marital issue per se. Is violence involved in the family? There isn't much light and understanding on what it means for the youth, what it means for those who are still in courtship, who are still dating. I mean, how best can they address the issues of gender-based violence, and how best can they actually live on to portray a society that has less cases of gender-based violence? Can you just zoom on that, and then I'll give it to Doc as well.
You cannot preach that which you do not know. So, youths today, if I was to ask you, what is it to fall in love? You have this fairy tale imagination of what it is. What is it to have a girlfriend? You have your own definition. But I believe that the youth need to know and need to be told. We need to call a spade, a black kettle, a black kettle. What is wrong needs to be called out. Bad behavior needs to be called out, and there needs to be consequences from that young age. Because the reason why now there's so much talk about abuse and intimate partner violence is because we have nurtured this disease and we have let it grow into grown men, grown women, married men who think it's okay to just push and shove each other because it was a small nudge. We need to thwart that, right, nip it in the bud. When children are, because now, let's face it, children are maturing way faster. During my time, people started having serious relationships in varsity and beyond.
Yes.
But now you'll find grade 6s and 7s talking about not just like during our time when it would be like, oh, he has a boyfriend or she has a girl. No, during our time, it was different. Now there's so many dynamics that come into play. We have globalized as a community. We're no longer just in one nation. There's so much access to information. So if we do not control the information that goes in and out of these young minds, the information that they need to get, if we do not also aid to accurately giving information that is appropriate and that is honest, we're going back to that honesty issue. They're not kids anymore. They're young adults. Let's face that. As bitter a pill as it may be to chew or swallow, they're young adults. Times have changed. Let's bite the bullet by the horns.
Okay.
And I think I mixed two sayings there, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yes,
but yeah, we need to be honest. We need to have those discussions and start teaching about gender-based violence, not violence, just violence against women, but also violence against men, and the far-reaching consequences that they have straight into adulthood as probably married men and women.
All right. Thank you for that. Doc, before you address this one, perhaps in your contribution, could you also I'll just try and take you back a little on the issue of trauma and gender-based violence. Maybe just your quick contribution on what it means for the youth, as well as address the issue of trauma. How best can we live with trauma, and how best, and maybe in terms of addressing gender-based violence, is who experiences this trauma, the family setup, and what are the effects of such exposure to maybe an experience of gender-based violence, not only to the victim and the perpetrator, but to the wider community. So you can just sum it up there as we're running behind time.
Okay, I would say that gender-based violence, in all its different manifestations, it produces trauma, it produces fear, it produces anxiety. And when it comes to our youth, because normally they don't have the liberty to speak out. Remember our African setup? When you're a child, there are some scenarios whereby even if you can see that there is disharmony between your parents, you are not allowed to voice out any concerns. Sometimes you see young people witnessing beatings between their parents. So obviously that leaves them with trauma. And of course, I would say we need to even review existing laws and policies that are applicable to GBV, femicide, and other forms of violence for the benefit of youth. I'll speak about young people. You find that even our rape laws, our current rape laws, which need to be aligned with our constitution, you find that as a rape victim, there's so many expectations that are supposed to, that come with you succeeding, let's say, in a rape allegation. Did she kick him? Did she push him enough? Did she push him away enough? How was the response? What was she wearing? You find those things sort of like work against our youth because our young people, they're still young and very experimental. So obviously, for young people, we need to also introduce social behavior change programs. And another thing is, I want to say, especially to young girls, marriage is not a profession. Marriage is not, it is not something for you to be fine. I mean, like, dream about all of your life. That's why we find young people getting into these intimate partner relationships with old men, and where they get abused and the like. If you are a young person, focus on your books, focus on your career, focus on your goal, have a vision, have a plan for your life. Don't live on this earth waiting to see or benefit from some old man who is finished and who is there to also finish you up. I know that if this applies even to boys, lest we forget our boys. Boys, they should stay away from old women who want to finish them up. They should concentrate, focus on their careers, do something with your life. Don't rush into marriage. Don't rush into sexual relationships. It will only mess your life.
All right, all right.
That's
Thank
where I
you.
can now.
Thank you, Doc, for that. It's very, there's a very wise words coming from you. Maybe as you round it up, maybe just a highlight on, there's this question that always comes when someone is abused or is a victim of gender-based violence. Why did she stay? Why did they stay? There's always I think this is the expression of those stereotypes that we were once mentioning about. Maybe just a brief analysis into that. What's the dynamics that are at play? I mean, with someone's being told, why did you stay for so long? Maybe we can just touch on that and then just provide your conclusion to the topic, to the show. Sorry.
Okay, I hope I can be brief, as you said.
Okay.
That question, why did you stay? This is a message to everyone, from all victims, or all the victims that I have spoken to and I've been in contact with. That question is a very hurtful question. Why did you stay? First of all, it's not easy to leave. Like Doc is rightfully saying, for most girls, for most women, this man is the provider. And there's that fear, though you may say you just love riches, but then there's that fear. What next? There are children that are involved. There is the aspect of that person who society sees as this epitome of a good husband or a good woman for the men, and you can't just leave. The issue of what if? What if he changes? What if she changes? What if I leave and I struggle? And then there's also something that people forget, that in the channel of an abusive partner or an abusive relationship, or in the channel of abuse, after you have left, over 70% of perpetrators follow their victim because you're going to speak. You've been isolated and you can't speak. But after you've left, you will eventually speak, and they don't want that. So this question of why did you not leave? It's not easy to leave. It's not easy to just wake up and go. And most of the times, statistically, a person who leaves an abusive relationship will have 4 attempts, at least 4 attempts
Of coming.
of going and coming back and going and coming back, because that's why we keep saying it's not just a physical experience, it's emotional, it's psychological. So long after the wounds, the physical wounds have healed, long after they've disappeared and you've forgotten about it, the emotional trauma still stays and the mental trauma still stays. So, yes, like Doc rightfully said, marriage is not an achievement. It is not an achievement. You can be married at any age after achieving that which you feel you were destined to achieve. So, for young girls and young boys out there, don't aim to put it on your CV. It's not an accolade. And at the same time, for those of you that are going through whatever form of abuse, whatever type of violation that you may be experiencing, be it financial, be it social, be it physical, emotional, psychological, there's always someone who will listen, someone who you can talk to. And there are places where you can go. There's safe houses where you can be protected against your perpetrator until you're ready to face the world. And as daunting a task as it may be to leave, when you are ready, when the time is right, do leave. But the most important thing is to leave with your life while you still can.
All right, all right. Thank you for that contribution. For our listeners and viewers, thank you for being part of the show. I'm sure there were a lot of takeaways you can have from this show. For the youth, there isn't anything to rush for. Marriage is not an achievement. And not only marriage, just try and not practice violence in your relationships. Talk to each other. There's so many ways you can handle conflict and get help when you feel like you're in trouble. All right, that's it from the studio. Thank you, Doc, for being part of the show. Until we meet again next week. Goodbye for now.